It always starts the same way, not with the public announcement or the breaking headline on the front page of a tabloid, but with a whisper. A whisper that travels through the corridors of private clubs, behind the walls of discreet hotels, through the filtered tones of journalists who always seem to know more than they are saying. And in this case, the whisper was about Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, a woman who has lived her entire adult life under the double glare of celebrity ambition and royal duty. A whisper that said she was still keeping company with Rory McIlroy, the world-famous golfer, while married to Prince Harry. Now, rumors alone rarely ignite a storm. What turned whispers into fire was the re-emergence of someone from Meghan's past, someone who had every reason to remember her intimately and no reason to protect her anymore. Cory Vitiello, her ex-boyfriend. Cory wasn't a stranger, not an anonymous source, but a man who had been part of her life just before she stepped into the global spotlight as Harry's fiancé. And when Cory began leaking what he claimed was proof, evidence that Meghan's ties to Rory were not just old gossip, but ongoing, everything changed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To understand the weight of this revelation, we must first step back into Harry's world. Prince Harry has always lived in a state of emotional tension. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the soldier who found solace in combat zones, the prince who struggled to reconcile duty with personal freedom. For him, trust is not a casual word. It is everything. Every relationship he has built since Diana's death has been measured against betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation. When Meghan entered his life, she seemed to offer something different. Loyalty, companionship, and someone who understood the brutality of media intrusion. That was the story, the fairy tale the world was sold. But what if that fairy tale was a carefully constructed facade, one that could unravel with a single leaked message or a blurry hotel photo? The scandal hits at the heart of the royal marriage because it is not just about an alleged affair or rekindled friendship. It is about betrayal, image, and the fragility of trust under the microscope of global attention. It is about Harry finding himself cornered again, forced to question not only his marriage but the decisions that led him to walk away from the royal family, abandon royal protection, and carve a new life in America. If Meghan is exposed, if Rory McIlroy's name becomes the symbol of another hidden truth, then everything Harry sacrificed, his titles, his home, his brotherhood with William, suddenly seems like it was for nothing. The middle of this introduction brings us closer to the so-called proof. According to whispers tied to Cory Vitiello, Meghan had allegedly been seen frequenting the same discreet hotel more than once, her visits coinciding with Rory McIlroy's stays. A few carefully released details, a booking here, a time-stamped sighting there, were enough to send tabloids and online communities into overdrive. Some argued it was pure coincidence. Others suggested it was nothing more than friendly meetings. But the framing of the leak was brutal. Meghan wasn't meeting Rory as an old acquaintance, but allegedly slipping into patterns of secrecy while her husband was worlds away. And when these whispers gain traction, perception quickly becomes reality. This is where the story takes on its emotional weight. Imagine Harry sitting across from Meghan as headlines swirl and former lovers speak. His anger isn't just about Rory, or even about Meghan. It is about history repeating itself. Diana's marriage to Charles crumbled under the weight of infidelity and betrayal. Harry grew up watching that pain firsthand. And now, decades later, he is forced to face the same specter in his own marriage. To him, the very idea that Meghan could still be connected to Rory, or that Cory could know enough to make it plausible, is a violation of the trust he built his entire life around. But the introduction cannot simply dwell on the allegations. It must also ask, why now? Why would Cory come forward years after moving on? Why would Rory's name resurface just as Harry and Meghan face criticism over their fading Hollywood deals and growing estrangement from the royal family? Timing is never an accident in scandals of this magnitude. In the court of public opinion, leaks don't just happen, they are calculated. Cory's proof was not only about Meghan's alleged actions, but about dismantling the very brand she and Harry have fought to build. The ending of this introduction leaves us at a point of tension where curiosity outweighs answers. This is no longer just Meghan Markle's scandal. It is Prince Harry's crucible. Every eye is fixed on how he will respond. whether he will defend his wife, confront her behind closed doors, or allow cracks in the marriage to become visible to the world. The emotional fallout is as gripping as the rumor itself. For if Harry reacts with fury, if the fight between them becomes real and brutal, then it marks not just a personal fracture, but a seismic shift in the narrative that has defined them since their wedding day. Not with the scandal itself, but with the threads of history that lead into it, the quiet storylines that, when pieced together, create the background of a woman whose past relationships would one day be weaponized against her. To truly understand the drama that exploded when Cory Vitiello leaked alleged proof of Meghan's ongoing connection with Rory McIlroy, we must first revisit Meghan's romantic past and the role Cory played in her journey to the top. Meghan Markle, before she was the Duchess of Sussex, was an ambitious actress trying to carve out her place in Hollywood. She had been married once before, to producer Trevor Engelson, in a union that ended in divorce long before Prince Harry ever entered the frame. But after that divorce, Meghan began dating Cory Vitiello, a Canadian celebrity chef with his own measure of fame and influence. Their relationship was not casual. It was serious enough that they were seen together publicly, traveled, and were woven into each other's social circles. Cory was not just a placeholder in Meghan's life. He was an anchor during a pivotal time when Meghan was redefining who she was and what she wanted from life. The Cory chapter of Meghan's story has often been overshadowed by her later romance with Prince Harry, but it holds significant weight. Their relationship lasted for about 2 years, a period during which Meghan was still starring on the television series Suits. By all accounts, Cory and Meghan were comfortable and stable. Yet behind the stability, Meghan's ambitions for a bigger stage remained ever present. When Meghan met Harry in 2016 through mutual friends, her relationship with Cory was still unfolding. The timing has long fueled speculation that Meghan overlapped the end of one romance with the beginning of another, creating a gray area in which loyalties were blurred. It is this overlap that makes Cory's later role in the scandal all the more potent. As someone who had once shared her private life, Cory was positioned to observe the ways Meghan managed her relationships, her ability to pivot, and her understanding of image. To him, the story of Meghan moving from his arm to Harry's may not have been one of pure romance, but one of calculation. Whether that perception was fair or born of bitterness is irrelevant. What matters is that Cory carried it with him, and years later, when Meghan's name became synonymous with controversy, he had an opportunity to speak. But before Cory could step forward with leaks and claims, another figure loomed large in Meghan's past, Rory McIlroy. The world-renowned golfer first entered Meghan's orbit when she was carving out her niche in the celebrity social scene. They were seen together on multiple occasions, laughing, mingling at parties, and, most memorably, in public charity events. Meghan and Rory seemed to enjoy a friendship that sparked rumors even then. Was it platonic? Was it flirtatious? The truth was never confirmed, but the speculation became part of Meghan's early celebrity narrative. Rory McIlroy, as an athlete at the top of his field, commanded immense public attention. To be linked with him was, in some ways, a badge of relevance for Meghan as she was transitioning from TV actress to global name. Their connection was not buried or hidden. Tabloids enjoyed splashing photos of Meghan and Rory together, using innuendo to suggest a closeness beyond friendship. For Rory, it may have been nothing more than a friendship with a rising starlet. For Meghan, however, those connections formed part of the network she was building to climb the ladder of fame. Cory Vitiello, Meghan's partner at the time, would have observed this. He would have seen Meghan's ability to maintain ties, her knack for navigating relationships in ways that served her long-term goals. Whether he approved or not is irrelevant. What is clear is that years later, when he decided to speak out, he specifically drew attention not to some anonymous man, but to Rory McIlroy. That choice was deliberate. Rory represented a ghost from Meghan's past that carried just enough plausibility to reignite public speculation. Chapter 1 must linger on this history because without it, the scandal loses its depth. Meghan's relationship with Cory was not a footnote. It was a stepping stone. Rory's friendship was not a random rumor. It was part of her public tapestry. And Harry, when he eventually entered Meghan's life, did so in the shadow of both. Imagine for a moment being Harry, swept off your feet by a woman the world portrayed as charming and misunderstood, only to later learn that her past was filled with overlapping storylines, ambiguous friendships, and ex-lovers who hadn't disappeared quietly. For Harry, who had lived his entire life under scrutiny, these dynamics were not just inconvenient. They were red flags waiting to explode. This brings us to the heart of why Cory's later revelations cut so deeply. He wasn't just a man with an old grudge. He was a former partner with intimate knowledge of Meghan's habits, her social circle, and her ambitions. When he leaked the suggestion that Meghan was still secretly meeting Rory, it wasn't dismissed as an outrageous fabrication. People listened. Why? Because the foundation for that story had already been laid years earlier. As this first chapter closes, the tension is established. Meghan's past relationships were never simply in the past. They were threads woven into her ascent, threads that men like Cory and Rory held in their hands long after Meghan had moved on. And when those threads were pulled at the right moment, the entire fabric of her marriage to Harry was at risk of unraveling. This is the beginning of the unraveling, the groundwork for the storm that would come. Cory knew Meghan intimately. Rory had history with her publicly, and Harry was left to reconcile the woman he loved with the whispers that refused to stay buried. And as whispers turned into claims of proof, the brutal fight between Harry and Meghan was not just about present betrayal, but about the ghosts of a past Meghan could never fully escape. With Rory McIlroy stepping into focus, not as a random name thrown into gossip columns, but as a significant figure in Meghan Markle's story, a connection that has lingered in the background long enough to take on a life of its own. To outsiders, Rory was simply the Irish golfer with world titles, championships, and a charisma that made him an easy headline. But to those who followed Meghan's pre-royal life closely, Rory was one of the men whose name kept surfacing whenever her social connections were discussed. Their story began in the mid-2010s, at a time when Meghan was still an actress on Suits, but had already developed a keen understanding of the power of proximity to influence. Meghan had a knack for aligning herself with people who could open doors, people whose fame or prestige lent weight to her own brand. Rory, already a household name in sports, fit this mold perfectly. Their friendship became publicly visible in 2014 when Rory doused Meghan with water during the Ice Bucket Challenge. What might have been a playful celebrity stunt became a lightning rod for speculation. Photos of Meghan laughing as Rory tipped ice water over her head made rounds on social media, sparking whispers that the two had grown closer than casual acquaintances. At the time, Meghan brushed off the rumors, portraying Rory as nothing more than a friend and fellow participant in a charitable movement. But rumors rarely fade quietly when they involve a man like Rory. He was single, wealthy, and globally recognized. Meghan, meanwhile, was on the cusp of transitioning from supporting actress to something more. For those watching from the outside, their chemistry in public appearances seemed natural, effortless. The line between friendship and something deeper was thin enough for gossip to flourish. Rory's role in Meghan's rise is subtle but undeniable. He was one of the high-profile names she was linked to during a crucial period in her life, just before she met Harry. Meghan's appearances alongside Rory offered her visibility outside the bubble of Suits fandom. He represented access to a world of athletes, sponsors, luxury events, and high-net-worth individuals. Whether their bond was romantic or not, Rory gave Meghan what she had always sought: placement in circles where her name mattered. This connection takes on more meaning when framed against Meghan's relationship with Cory Vitiello, which was ongoing around the same time. Cory, a chef rooted in Canada, represented stability. Rory, a jet-setting athlete, represented glamour. Meghan was a woman in transition, moving between the grounded comfort of one partner and the tantalizing possibility of influence in another circle. It was this dynamic, caught between stability and ambition, that defined Meghan's pre-royal years. The narrative that later exploded, that Meghan still went to hotels with Rory while married to Harry, did not come out of thin air. It drew strength from this history. Because Rory had been part of Meghan's public orbit before, because they had shared moments that fed speculation, it wasn't difficult for people to believe there might still be something there. In fact, that belief thrived because Meghan had never entirely shut the door on Rory publicly. She never denied their closeness with the firmness of someone burying a rumor for good. Instead, the story remained ambiguous, alive in the margins, waiting to be reawakened. Rory himself never fueled the rumors, but silence often speaks louder than denial. He never went on record to distance himself from Meghan in a definitive way. Instead, he let the chatter swirl, neither confirming nor dismissing what people thought they saw. In celebrity culture, that silence is oxygen. It allows the public to write their own narratives, to imagine the late-night texts, the casual encounters, the private rendezvous that might explain why Meghan and Rory's names kept resurfacing together. From Harry's perspective, this ambiguity was poison. Even before Cory Vitiello leaked his alleged proof, Harry would have been aware of Rory's name lingering around Meghan's history. Imagine the weight of marrying someone only to later discover that one of her most visible past connections is a global superstar who can't be erased from the headlines. Meghan's history with Rory wasn't a private ex in a quiet neighborhood. It was a public figure who could always be brought back into the spotlight with a single story. For Harry, that meant his marriage was never fully insulated from the echoes of Meghan's past. As Chapter 2 unfolds, it becomes clear that Rory's presence wasn't just about friendship or charity events. He represented something larger. The reminder that Meghan's climb to royalty was built on a series of carefully navigated relationships. Rory was one of those touchstones, someone whose status validated Meghan's ability to play in bigger leagues. Cory knew this. When Cory decided to point the world back toward Rory, he wasn't just naming an old friend. He was igniting a narrative that was already believable to the public. Rory McIlroy's entrance into Meghan's story, then, is not simply a matter of past rumor. It is the foundation upon which the later scandal rests. The ice bucket moment, the public smiles, the private whispers. These were the bricks that built the wall of speculation. And once Cory began pulling at that wall, suggesting Meghan's ties to Rory had not ended even after her marriage to Harry, the structure collapsed into chaos. What makes Rory's part in this even more striking is his silence after the scandal broke. When his name was tied to Meghan again, when whispers turned into accusations of hotel meetings, Rory maintained the same posture he had years before, quiet, reserved, offering no confirmation but no denial. For some, that silence suggested innocence, a refusal to dignify rumors with response. For others, it was damning, a refusal to challenge a narrative that might, just might, hold truth. And for Harry, that silence would have been deafening, a void that only deepened his suspicion. By the end of this chapter, Rory has emerged not as a side character, but as a central figure in Meghan's controversial journey. He is the ghost that lingers in every room, the name that cannot be erased, the man whose presence alone is enough to destabilize a marriage already burdened by the pressures of royalty, exile, and media scrutiny. Meghan's connection to Rory was always ambiguous, but in ambiguity lies danger. And when that ambiguity was reignited by Cory's leaks, it lit the fuse on a story that would explode in the most brutal way for Harry and Meghan's relationship. With Cory Vitiello himself, a man who had, for years, been relegated to the footnotes of Meghan Markle's life story. He was the boyfriend before the prince, the Canadian chef who had provided Meghan with companionship and stability during her suit's years. But when the scandal broke, Cory was no longer content to remain in the background. Instead, he emerged as the unlikely detonator of one of the most explosive controversies to touch Harry and Meghan's marriage. The question that immediately arose was why? Why would Cory, years removed from Meghan and her orbit, suddenly choose to speak? Was it revenge, regret, or a desperate bid for relevance? Or was it, as he might frame it, the truth finally coming to light? To understand Cory's actions, one must first recall the way their relationship ended. Meghan and Cory had been together for nearly 2 years, and by most accounts, their romance had the hallmarks of something solid. Friends described them as compatible. Meghan attended events with Cory, dined with his family, and shared in his culinary world. Cory was not a fling, nor was he an unknown figure. He had his own standing as a chef, with acclaim in Canada and a reputation as a rising name in the food world. Yet, when Meghan met Harry, the relationship seemed to disintegrate almost overnight. Cory became the man left behind, overshadowed by the grandeur of a royal romance. For some men, that might have been the end of it. They would have moved on, perhaps with bitterness, but without action. Cory, however, carried with him an experience that was unique. He had been close enough to Meghan to know her patterns, to see the way she navigated relationships with precision and calculation. He had witnessed firsthand her connections to figures like Rory McIlroy. And when Meghan's marriage to Harry began facing its own strains, financial scrutiny, public criticism, fading deals, Cory saw an opening. The leak itself did not arrive like a tabloid bombshell in the dead of night. It trickled out, first whispered in niche corners of gossip blogs and whispered forums, before gaining traction. Cory allegedly fed details to individuals who he knew would not let them lie dormant. There were mentions of hotel bookings that coincided with Rory McIlroy's appearances, snippets of information suggesting that Meghan's connection to Rory was not buried in the past, but alive in the present. Cory never released a signed affidavit or a press conference. Instead, he played the role of a shadowy source, carefully curating the narrative without attaching his name directly, at least, not at first. What drove him to do it? One explanation is revenge. Meghan had, in Cory's eyes, discarded him at the very moment she glimpsed a bigger opportunity. He might have felt used, a stepping stone on her climb to royal heights. By leaking proof years later, he could exact a measure of retribution, tarnishing the carefully polished image Meghan had cultivated. Another explanation is envy. Watching from afar as Meghan married into one of the most famous families in the world, appeared on magazine covers, and built a brand with Harry might have festered into resentment. Cory had his own career, but nothing matched the global recognition Meghan commanded. Perhaps this was his way of reclaiming the narrative. But there is also a darker, more complex possibility, that Cory believed he was exposing the truth. If he genuinely thought Meghan was maintaining a secret relationship with Rory while married to Harry, then his leaks might have been framed in his own mind as an act of justice, a way to unmask hypocrisy. In that interpretation, Cory's revenge was not purely personal but moral. He would not be the man silenced by loyalty to someone who, in his view, had manipulated her way into power. He would be the man who forced the world to see her as he had always seen her. From the public's perspective, Cory's involvement gave the scandal weight. Anonymous sources can be dismissed, jealous exes can be ridiculed. But Cory was different. He had verifiable history with Meghan. His claims could not be waved away as idle gossip. People remembered photos of Meghan and Cory together, interviews in which she had referenced him obliquely, and the timing of their breakup aligning with her first meetings with Harry. When his name was tied to the leaks, it carried an authenticity that others could not. It lent credibility to whispers that might otherwise have faded. For Harry, this was not simply an attack on his marriage. It was a knife twisted by someone who had once been close to the woman he loved. Imagine the fury of realizing that a former boyfriend of your wife was releasing claims into the world, framing her as disloyal, feeding narratives of betrayal. It was humiliating on a deeply personal level, because Cory was not a distant stranger, but a man who had once shared Meghan's life. Harry's anger, then, was twofold: rage at Meghan for allowing her past to haunt them, and rage at Cory for exploiting it. The media, of course, thrived on Cory's involvement. Headlines splashed his name with relish. Ex-boyfriend exposes Meghan, chef spills royal secrets. Cory Vitiello links Meghan to Rory. Television pundits speculated endlessly about his motives, some portraying him as a bitter man unable to move on, others as a whistleblower revealing the cracks in Meghan's carefully crafted image. Social media lit up with debates, hashtags, and fan wars. For Meghan's critics, Cory became a hero. For her defenders, he was a snake. The timing of his leak was also impossible to ignore. Harry and Meghan were already facing criticism for their faltering relationship with Netflix, their financial pressures in California, and their growing estrangement from the royal family. Into that fragile moment, Cory injected his narrative, ensuring maximum damage. It was not just about what he leaked, but when he leaked it. He chose his moment like a strategist on a battlefield, striking when the enemy was already vulnerable. By the end of this chapter, one truth becomes clear. Cory's role in the scandal cannot be reduced to a single motive. He was a man driven by overlapping impulses: revenge, envy, justice, perhaps even desperation. What matters is not whether his proof was real or fabricated, but that it was believable enough to ignite a firestorm. He knew exactly which buttons to press, and he pressed them. In doing so, he transformed from forgotten ex-boyfriend into central antagonist, the man who lit the fuse on Harry and Meghan's most brutal fight. With the so-called proof itself, the linchpin of the entire controversy. Without it, Cory Vitiello's words would have been nothing more than the bitter ramblings of an ex who never quite moved on. But with it, whether genuine or manipulated, the narrative took on an entirely different weight. The world has seen time and again how a single photo, a leaked email, or a time-stamped receipt can alter the course of public perception. And in this case, what was leaked appeared damning enough to push Prince Harry into fury and Meghan into the corner of denial and defense. The first whispers of evidence started small. Reports of Meghan being spotted in the lobby of a discreet hotel in Toronto, a place where Rory McIlroy had also been staying during tournaments. Nothing explicit at first, just overlapping timelines, coincidences, names appearing on reservation logs. But when those details began to align, when the same hotel staff allegedly confirmed that Meghan's name appeared on guest lists that matched Rory's stays, the whispers turned into a roaring fire. Screenshots of supposed reservation slips, grainy surveillance stills of a woman with Meghan's likeness entering side doors at odd hours, and fragments of messages Cory claimed to have kept all circulated online. For the tabloids, this was gold. Headlines screamed of secret rendezvous, while talk shows speculated breathlessly about whether Meghan had been living a double life. The so-called proof was presented as a mosaic. Individually, the pieces might have been dismissed, but together they painted a portrait that, for many, was too convincing to ignore. Even if the leaks could not be independently verified, the very existence of them was enough to destabilize Meghan's carefully curated image. For Harry, this was where the emotional weight landed hardest. Imagine seeing documents, whether genuine or not, suggesting your wife has been meeting an old flame in hotels. Imagine hearing staff accounts of late-night comings and goings. Imagine scrolling through tabloids plastered with photos claiming to show her silhouette. The humiliation was public, but the anger was deeply private. Harry had already lived his life haunted by the tabloids' treatment of his mother. Now, he was reliving that nightmare with his wife at the center of the storm. The difference was that this time, the whispers weren't just about media intrusion, they were about betrayal. Meghan's reaction was to deny. She called the proof fabricated, a cruel attempt to smear her reputation. She claimed Cory's motivations were tainted by bitterness, that the so-called evidence was nothing more than a patchwork of coincidences and lies. Her team framed it as another chapter in the ongoing harassment of a woman who had already sacrificed so much. But denial alone rarely stops the momentum of scandal. The more Meghan dismissed the proof, the more her critics clung to it. To them, her very insistence on dismissal rang hollow, as though the louder she protested, the more she had to hide. This tug-of-war between truth and fabrication quickly spilled into the public arena. Online forums dissected every blurry photo, every timeline, every leaked screenshot. Did the hotel wallpaper in the photo match the actual property? Could the timestamp be verified? Was that truly Meghan's handwriting on the reservation? Amateur sleuths pored over every detail, convinced they could solve the mystery. Meanwhile, royal commentators drew parallels to Charles and Diana, to the age-old narrative of infidelity tearing the royal family apart. What made the so-called proof even more powerful was its plausibility. Meghan had history with Rory. She had been in those circles before. Cory had dated her during the very years when those overlaps occurred. All of it was believable enough that people didn't need absolute confirmation. Perception, in scandals of this magnitude, becomes reality. If enough people believe it, it doesn't matter whether it's true. The damage is already done. Inside Harry's world, the release of this proof set the stage for confrontation. To him, the evidence wasn't just public humiliation, it was personal betrayal. Whether real or not, it forced him to question his wife, to demand answers, to revisit every conversation in which she had dismissed Rory as just an old friend. He was left with a choice: believe Meghan's denials and risk looking like a fool if the leaks turned out to be true, or believe the leaks and shatter his marriage in anger. Neither choice was fair, but both carried consequences that stretched far beyond his personal life. This is why Chapter 4 holds so much weight. It shows how fragile truth becomes when filtered through leaks and scandal. It demonstrates the power of perception, how a carefully timed leak from an ex can devastate even the most fortified of marriages. And it captures the emotional storm within Harry himself, a man who had already given up titles, security, and family ties for love, now forced to wonder whether that love had been compromised all along. With the inevitable clash, the moment the swirling storm outside finally bursts into confrontation within the walls of Harry and Meghan's private world. For days, perhaps weeks, Harry had carried the weight of Cory's leaks, the headlines splashed across tabloids, the quiet yet deafening whispers from the Palace Network, and the silence of Rory McIlroy, who neither confirmed nor denied anything. Eventually, that weight became too much to bear. The confrontation was not delayed, it was unavoidable. Harry had grown up in a world where betrayal was never abstract. He had seen it destroy his parents' marriage, had lived through the anguish of his mother being humiliated on the world stage, and had sworn that his own marriage would never mirror that pain. Yet here he was, staring at his wife, the woman he had defended at all costs, with documents and photos in his hands that suggested she had betrayed him in the same way his father had betrayed Diana. The emotional toll on him was unimaginable, a mixture of fury, disbelief, and heartbreak. The setting of this fight was not a grand palace or a public event. It was their home, the place meant to shield them from the relentless scrutiny of the outside world. But in this moment, privacy was no protection. Their home became the battlefield, words became weapons, and silence became torture. Harry demanded answers. He pressed Meghan to explain the hotel bookings, the photos, the timing. He asked her why Cory would still have access to such details if she had cut ties completely. And he asked, perhaps most painfully of all, whether she had ever truly left Rory in the past. Meghan's response was a mixture of denial and defiance. She insisted the proof was fabricated, a carefully orchestrated smear campaign by an ex who had never forgiven her for moving on. She reminded Harry of how many times the press had twisted stories about them, how the tabloids thrived on their misery, how every slip in public became exaggerated into something grotesque. She framed the leaks as yet another chapter in the ongoing war against her and, by extension, against him. But what Meghan could not erase was the look in Harry's eyes that no longer saw her purely as a victim, but as someone he could no longer entirely trust. The brutality of the fight was not in the shouting alone, though voices were raised and accusations hurled. The brutality was in the unspoken history that hung between them. Harry reminded Meghan of the sacrifices he had made, leaving his family, relinquishing royal duties, defending her against relentless criticism. He accused her of taking his loyalty for granted, of endangering not just their marriage but his very identity. Meghan, in turn, fired back that he had always doubted her, that his loyalty was conditional, that he was too quick to believe the worst. She accused him of seeing ghosts of Diana's pain in her actions, of projecting his mother's suffering onto their relationship. At the heart of their fight was not just the question of whether Meghan had met Rory in secret, but whether Harry and Meghan could trust each other at all. Every marriage has its cracks, but for them, those cracks were widened by the global stage upon which they lived. Millions were watching, millions had opinions, and millions were ready to see their downfall. The fight between them was private, but its echoes were public, reverberating through every headline and every whisper about their marriage. The confrontation left scars. Neighbors reported shouting. Staff described tense silences. Friends noticed Harry's withdrawn demeanor, Meghan's defensive posture. The fight was not a single moment. It was the culmination of years of tension, of sacrifices Harry had made and suspicions he had buried, all exploding in one merciless evening. In the aftermath, their home was quiet, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of wounds too raw to heal, of questions unanswered, of love bruised but not yet broken. This chapter underscores the human cost of scandal. It is easy to read headlines and debate evidence, but within the walls of a marriage, the pain is not abstract, it is visceral. Harry's fury was not simply about a photo or a reservation. It was about betrayal, about history repeating itself, about the fear that he had abandoned everything for a love that might not have been what he thought it was. Meghan's denial was not simply about protecting her image. It was about survival, about refusing to let her entire life unravel over whispers and shadows. By the end of this chapter, the fight has done what Cory's leaks and Rory's silence could not. It has brought Harry and Meghan's marriage to the edge of collapse. They may still appear together in public, still project unity when cameras flash, but behind closed doors, trust has been fractured. The confrontation has left Harry doubting, Meghan defensive, and their future uncertain. And the brutal truth is that once trust is broken, no amount of denial, no carefully crafted statement, no public show of unity can fully restore it. With the ripple effect that the brutal confrontation between Harry and Meghan had beyond their own four walls. In any ordinary marriage, a fight of that magnitude would remain private, whispered about perhaps among close friends, hidden behind polite smiles. But Harry and Meghan do not live ordinary lives. Every silence is noticed, every strained glance captured, every absence explained away by whispers that travel faster than facts. And so, while they grappled with their personal pain, the royal family's whisper network picked up the scent of trouble. The royal family has always functioned like a labyrinth of silence, duty, and observation. What happens in one room is reported in another, not through direct confrontation, but through carefully placed words, raised eyebrows, and subtle shifts in behavior. Staff, aides, advisors, and even family members themselves have long understood the power of information. When Harry and Meghan's fights spilled into their household and into the ears of those closest to them, it was only a matter of time before those whispers traveled across the Atlantic, back to palace corridors where the Sussexes' names are still spoken daily. Charles, William, Camilla, and even Princess Anne would have heard the rumblings. The story was not just about Meghan being linked again to Rory McIlroy. It was about the fight, the shouting, the evident fracture between Harry and Meghan. For Charles, already burdened with the task of securing the future of the monarchy, the whispers confirmed his worst fears. Harry's marriage was not a stabilizing factor. It was a liability, another headline waiting to explode. For William, the story carried a different kind of weight. His relationship with Harry had already collapsed under the strain of accusations, interviews, and betrayals. Now, he saw confirmation that Meghan was the storm he had always warned Harry about. It was fuel for his belief that Harry had chosen the wrong path, the wrong partner, and was paying the price. Within palace circles, the whispers carried both schadenfreude and concern. There were those who quietly admitted they felt vindicated. They had always doubted Meghan, always believed she was more actress than duchess, more strategist than spouse. For them, Cory's leaks and Rory's silence were not shocking. They were expected. They muttered that Harry should have known better, that Diana's son should never have been so reckless with his choice. Yet, there were others, more cautious, who understood the danger. A public implosion of Harry and Meghan's marriage would not only embarrass the couple, it would embarrass the institution itself. It would reopen wounds of scandal that the monarchy had worked tirelessly to bury after Charles and Diana, after Andrew's disgrace, after decades of carefully managed appearances. The whispers did not stop at judgment. They evolved into strategy. Advisors began to question whether the Sussexes could be further distanced from the crown in order to insulate the monarchy from fallout. Conversations likely turned to legal protections, financial ties, and the delicate question of what would happen if Harry sought a separation. The monarchy has always planned for contingencies, and Harry's marriage was now being quietly discussed as a contingency of its own. For Harry, the knowledge that his family was talking about his marriage behind his back would have been unbearable. He had already distanced himself from them, already painted himself as the son who walked away. But to know that they now whispered about Meghan's alleged betrayals, that they dissected his private pain as though it were strategy, would have deepened his sense of isolation. To him, it would not have mattered whether they expressed sympathy or scorn. What mattered was that his pain was once again entertainment, currency, a topic of quiet palace gossip. Meghan, too, would have felt the weight of the whispers. She had long accused the royal institution of smearing her, of planting stories, of allowing her reputation to be shredded to protect others. Now, with Rory's name back in the mix and Cory's leaks fueling speculation, she would have been convinced that the palace was seizing its opportunity. In her eyes, it was not coincidence that whispers traveled so fast. It was not accident that royal aides seemed to know before the tabloids did. To Meghan, it would have looked like confirmation that she was never truly free of their reach. Chapter 6 is not about the direct confrontation between Harry and Meghan. It is about the secondary battle, the invisible war waged in whispers, in boardrooms, in strategy sessions across the ocean. Every whisper reinforced Harry's fury, Meghan's defensiveness, and the widening gap between them. The palace may not have been the architect of the leaks, but it became the echo chamber that gave them power. The focus outward from the whispers of the palace to the roar of the outside world. Once Cory's leaks surfaced, once the supposed proof began circulating online, it was no longer a quiet scandal confined to the Sussex home or whispered among royal courtiers. It was everywhere. The tabloids devoured it, the morning talk shows replayed it endlessly, and social media erupted into a battlefield of opinions, defenses, and condemnations. The scandal became public property, dissected by millions who felt entitled to weigh in on a marriage that was already buckling under the weight of suspicion. The first blow came from the British press, long Meghan's most vocal critics. Headlines screamed betrayal and humiliation. Meghan was painted as the Duchess who had not left her past behind, who had played Harry for a fool. The Daily Mail, The Sun, and others rolled out front-page spreads with Rory McIlroy's name splashed alongside Meghan's, while Cory Vitiello's shadow hung over every paragraph. Photographs, grainy, out of focus, but suggestive, were analyzed with forensic detail. Was that Meghan's figure stepping into a hotel side entrance? Did the handbag match? Was the outline of her jawline the same as in past paparazzi shots? For tabloids, certainty wasn't required. Suggestion was enough to sell millions of copies and dominate news cycles. Across the Atlantic, the American media approached it differently, but no less hungrily. Morning shows like Good Morning America and The Today Show ran segments about the scandal, inviting body language experts, royal commentators, and psychologists to weigh in. Some argued Meghan was once again a victim of misogynistic narratives, her every move scrutinized in ways men like Rory were never subjected to. Others insisted that where there was smoke, there had to be fire, pointing to Meghan's history of navigating relationships strategically. The coverage may have been softer than in the UK, but the effect was the same. The story was everywhere. Then came the tidal wave of social media. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and online forums erupted with theories. Hashtags trended by the hour. Hashtag Meghan and Rory. Hashtag Cory Leaks. Hashtag Harry Betrayed. Amateur sleuths scoured hotel websites, compared flight logs, and pieced together timelines. Influencers filmed TikToks analyzing Meghan's body language in recent public appearances, suggesting her guilty conscience was written on her face. Others defended her fiercely, arguing that the entire scandal was nothing more than a coordinated smear campaign, pointing to how conveniently the leaks surfaced at the same time as Meghan and Harry faced career setbacks in Hollywood. The divide was sharp and vicious, with both sides unwilling to concede ground. Public opinion fractured further as celebrities weighed in. Some of Meghan's allies defended her, reiterating her claims that she had been relentlessly targeted by a press unwilling to let her live in peace. Others remained conspicuously silent, unwilling to tie their reputations to hers while the scandal unfolded. Rory McIlroy himself remained quiet, issuing no statement, which only fueled speculation. Silence, in the eyes of the public, was not neutrality, it was mystery. And mystery, when paired with leaked proof, was enough to keep the scandal burning. For Harry and Meghan, the public spectacle was a nightmare. Harry had long despised the press, blaming them for his mother's death, for his own humiliation, and for the constant pressure that defined his childhood. To see his marriage dissected in the same ruthless way cut deeply. He was not only furious at Meghan for putting him in this position, but also enraged at the world for watching, for laughing, for feeding on his pain. Meghan, meanwhile, was consumed by the battle to control her image. Every denial, every statement she issued was countered with new headlines, new speculation. Her denials did not silence the conversation, they amplified it, dragging her deeper into the public storm. The spectacle reached its peak when late-night comedians began joking about the scandal. Monologues referenced Meghan's royal golf connection. Jokes about hotel rooms and iced tea deliveries at midnight became punchlines. What might have once been confined to tabloids was now mainstream comedy fodder. For Harry, this was humiliation on a scale he had never endured. His private anguish had become global entertainment. This chapter emphasizes the destructive power of publicity. Once the story entered the bloodstream of the internet and mainstream media, it no longer mattered whether Cory's leaks were genuine. The truth became irrelevant. What mattered was perception, and perception was shaped by headlines, tweets, and viral videos. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to the masses, and the masses were merciless. For Meghan, the battle was about survival. For Harry, it was about dignity. Together, they were caught in a storm far larger than either of them could manage. And while the public spectacle raged, the cracks in their marriage widened further. Because scandals of this magnitude do not only embarrass, they destroy. They seep into every conversation, every glance, every silence, until the line between public narrative and private truth is blurred beyond recognition. T plunges into the private fallout between Harry and Meghan, taking the audience behind closed doors into the royal household where emotions had escalated beyond control. After Cory Vitiello's leak went public and social media erupted into a frenzy, the tension between the couple reached a boiling point. No longer could whispered suspicions or quiet suspicions be contained. Every glance, every word, every silence in the Sussex residence was charged with accusation and betrayal. The argument began late in the evening, a storm that had been building for weeks finally breaking. Harry, already emotionally frayed from months of media scrutiny, confronted Meghan in their private quarters. The conversation started with a demand for the truth. His voice, normally measured but now trembling with anger and hurt, cut through the room. "Meghan, I need to know, did you go to that hotel with Rory while we were married?" The words hung in the air, heavy and accusing. Meghan, shocked by the intensity of Harry's delivery, tried to maintain composure. Her attempts to explain and deny were drowned out by the tidal wave of media coverage pounding at their door, as if the entire world were listening. As the confrontation escalated, the couple's different coping mechanisms clashed. Harry, with his deep-seated distrust of the press and long history of frustration with public intrusion, demanded transparency and accountability. Meghan, fiercely protective of her privacy and reputation, resisted what she perceived as an invasive interrogation. Every defensive statement she made was interpreted as deceit, every pause as guilt. The tension became so palpable that even the walls of the residence seemed to vibrate with their anger. The fight quickly escalated beyond words. Accusations flew in both directions. Harry accused Meghan of recklessness, of disregarding the vows they had taken and the life they had promised to build together. Meghan countered with frustration over the constant public scrutiny, arguing that Harry's inability to manage the press had left her vulnerable and isolated. She reminded him of the numerous times she had been vilified in headlines, painted as a manipulator or opportunist. "Do you think this is easy for me?" she demanded, voice breaking. "I'm living under a microscope every day, and now my past is being dragged into the light to hurt you, to hurt us." The emotional intensity reached a point where rational discussion became impossible. The fight was no longer about past actions alone. It had become about trust, loyalty, and the fundamental survival of their marriage. Every statement, every rebuttal carried the weight of years of accumulated resentment, hurt, and fear. Harry's anger was fueled not only by the immediate scandal, but also by a sense of betrayal that he had been kept in the dark, by the belief that someone he loved had allowed such a breach to occur. Meghan's defensiveness was equally deep-rooted, a reaction to feeling constantly misrepresented and under siege. As the night wore on, the argument became cyclical. Harry would accuse, Meghan would defend, Meghan would plead, Harry would counter. The air was thick with frustration, disbelief, and sorrow. At one point, the confrontation devolved into silence, each of them retreating into their own thoughts, processing the emotional wounds inflicted by the other and by the relentless public attention. In those silent moments, the magnitude of their predicament became clear. They were no longer two individuals trying to navigate a private disagreement. They were a couple under global scrutiny, with every emotional outburst amplified by the world watching, judging, and waiting for them to falter. Amid the emotional chaos, The argument revealed cracks that had long been developing in their relationship. Harry's perception of Meghan's past choices as strategic and calculated clashed with Meghan's insistence that her past relationships were private and should remain so. The leak from Cory Vitiello became a symbol of intrusion and betrayal, representing not just an isolated event, but an ongoing pattern of exposure and vulnerability. Both felt powerless, trapped in a cycle where private disputes were inevitably turned into public spectacle. The night's confrontation left both shaken. Exhaustion replaced fury temporarily, but the underlying tension remained. Harry retreated to his study, replaying every detail of the leak, every possible implication, and every way Meghan's alleged actions might have betrayed him. Meghan, meanwhile, sat in quiet reflection, grappling with the impossibility of defending herself against an army of public opinion and the private hurt inflicted by someone she loved deeply. Neither slept that night, their thoughts consumed by what had been said, unsaid, and misinterpreted. By the end of Chapter 8, it becomes evident that the damage from Cory's leaks extends far beyond media headlines. The confrontation exposes raw, unfiltered emotions, revealing vulnerabilities that had been hidden behind public appearances and curated statements. It illustrates how external scandals, once leaked into the public domain, can infiltrate private spaces and transform intimate disagreements into battles for survival, reputation, and emotional connection. The couple's relationship, already under strain, now teeters on the edge of irreparable conflict, leaving viewers to wonder whether reconciliation is possible or if this is the beginning of the end. With the immediate aftermath of the explosive confrontation between Harry and Meghan, a scene that is as emotionally charged as it is chaotic. The morning after the night-long argument, the Sussex residence was heavy with an uneasy silence. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, with unspoken words and unresolved anger lingering in every corner. While the public watched the fallout unfold through leaked texts and tabloid speculation, the private reality was far more intense, intimate, and harrowing. Harry emerged first into the breakfast room, visibly worn and tense, his usually composed demeanor fractured by the weight of betrayal and sleepless hours. The strain of the previous night's confrontation had left him contemplative, almost haunted, as he sipped his coffee and replayed every moment of the fight. Each word Meghan had uttered, each pause that had felt like a confession, played over and over in his mind. He was struggling to reconcile the woman he had married with the revelations brought to light by Cory Vitiello's leak. The thought of Meghan allegedly visiting a hotel with Rory McIlroy while married to him gnawed at him relentlessly, blending personal hurt with an acute sense of public embarrassment. Meanwhile, Meghan was navigating the aftermath in her own way, retreating into her private spaces with a mixture of frustration and defensiveness. She felt cornered, not only by Harry's accusations but by the relentless media frenzy that had erupted overnight. Every phone notification, every headline, every social media post served as a reminder that the world was scrutinizing her, judging her, and amplifying every misstep. The psychological weight of living under such magnified attention was immense, and Meghan's stress manifested as a mixture of irritability, heightened alertness, and fierce protectiveness of her personal narrative. As the day unfolded, both Harry and Meghan faced the additional complication of external counsel and advisors trying to mediate the escalating tension. Family members and close aides were drawn into the conflict, each offering counsel, perspective, and sometimes unwelcome opinions. The royal household's internal mechanisms, designed to manage public scandals discreetly, were now actively working to contain the narrative while also attempting to soothe the fractured trust between the couple. However, the presence of advisors often added fuel to the fire, as their differing loyalties and interpretations of events sometimes exacerbated the already volatile emotional climate. The chapter delves deeper into the specific dynamics that emerged between Harry and Meghan during this period. Harry, grappling with a profound sense of personal betrayal, began to exhibit heightened vigilance and suspicion, scrutinizing communications, schedules, and even social interactions. His focus was sharp, almost laser-like, as he attempted to piece together the timeline of Meghan's alleged meetings and reconcile them with the picture of their marriage he had believed in. Meghan, on the other hand, felt increasingly defensive and misunderstood. She wrestled with the frustration of being portrayed as deceptive, while simultaneously trying to assert her own agency and control over her personal and professional life. The conflict, while private, inevitably spilled into the digital sphere. Cory Vitiello's leak had created a ripple effect across media outlets, blogs, and social platforms. Each article, each social media post, each whispered rumor magnified the couple's stress. Public commentary ranged from incredulity to judgment, with supporters and detractors alike weighing in on the scandal. For Harry and Meghan, the media attention was a constant, unrelenting pressure, turning a deeply personal confrontation into a performance under the harshest spotlight imaginable. The chapter emphasizes how external scrutiny can magnify private conflict, turning intimate disputes into public spectacles with consequences that extend far beyond the individuals involved. Amid the ongoing stress, the couple attempted, however briefly, to engage in dialogue. These attempts were fraught with tension, as trust had been eroded and communication channels strained. Even minor disagreements escalated, with past grievances resurfacing, compounding the current crisis. Each conversation became a delicate negotiation between airing grievances and managing public perception, a balance that neither Harry nor Meghan had been fully prepared to maintain under such intense scrutiny. Chapter 9 also examines the psychological and emotional toll of the situation. Harry experienced waves of anger, sadness, and helplessness, while Meghan navigated feelings of isolation, vulnerability, and defiance. Both were trapped in a cycle where emotional reactions fed into further misunderstandings, creating a feedback loop of tension and mistrust. Sleep became sporadic, appetite fluctuated, and the emotional climate of the residence reached levels of intensity that few could endure for long periods. The chapter concludes with a focus on the impending decisions the couple faced. With public scrutiny at its peak, private trust fractured, and emotional exhaustion mounting, Harry and Meghan were confronted with difficult choices about how to navigate their relationship and protect their family. The aftermath of Cory Vitiello's leak had set in motion a cascade of events that could not be easily reversed. How they responded in the days following the argument would shape not only their marriage, but also their public personas and interactions with the royal family. With the mounting tension between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle after the leak by Cory Vitiello continued to make waves across media outlets. By this point, the private storm that had begun in their residence had escalated into a public spectacle that neither could fully control. Social media was ablaze with speculation, accusations, and sensational headlines, while traditional media outlets raced to confirm details, amplifying every nuance of the controversy. For Harry and Meghan, the pressure was unrelenting. Every interaction, every statement, every move was scrutinized and dissected in real time. In the morning light, Harry's demeanor reflected exhaustion mixed with simmering anger. He had spent countless hours analyzing the timeline of Meghan's alleged meetings with Rory McIlroy, cross-referencing social media posts, hotel bookings, and witness statements. Each piece of evidence he reviewed added layers of complexity to his understanding, leaving him conflicted between disbelief, hurt, and a desire for confrontation. He wrestled internally with questions about loyalty, trust, and betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he had married with the allegations now dominating public discourse. Meghan, in contrast, attempted to maintain composure in the face of mounting pressure. While her public appearances remained polished and controlled, behind closed doors, she was navigating a mixture of defensiveness, frustration, and indignation. She felt constantly misrepresented, arguing that the narrative being presented in the media painted an incomplete and distorted picture of reality. Her advisors worked tirelessly to manage the optics, but the leak had ignited a firestorm that could not be easily contained. Meghan's internal struggle involved balancing her desire for privacy, her need to assert agency, and her awareness of the public implications of every action she took. The chapter explores a particularly tense confrontation in the late afternoon, when Harry confronted Meghan directly. The discussion, though initially civil, quickly escalated into a heated exchange. Harry's voice carried the weight of accumulated hurt and suspicion, while Meghan responded with a combination of defiance and defensiveness. The argument was marked by sharp interjections, pauses heavy with tension, and moments of emotional vulnerability that neither could fully articulate. Each accusation, counterargument, and emotional outburst further strained the fragile fabric of their relationship, highlighting the complex interplay of personal betrayal and public exposure. As the argument unfolded, both Harry and Meghan were acutely aware of the external pressures influencing their emotions. The media coverage, though not physically present in the room, loomed over every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every pause in the conversation. The knowledge that their private conflict had become a matter of public fascination added a surreal layer of pressure, intensifying the stakes of each interaction. The chapter emphasizes how external scrutiny can exacerbate internal conflict, turning a personal dispute into a high-stakes performance under the eyes of the world. Chapter 10 also delves into the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to scandal. Harry exhibited signs of heightened vigilance and emotional hyperawareness, analyzing not only Meghan's words, but also her tone, body language, and micro-expressions. He questioned motives, intentions, and potential hidden agendas, creating a mental landscape of suspicion that made resolution increasingly difficult. Meghan, on the other hand, navigated feelings of frustration, defensiveness, and isolation, struggling to assert her narrative while contending with relentless public judgment. Their interactions were a delicate balance of emotional projection, misinterpretation, and attempts at understanding, illustrating the profound strain that scandal can impose on intimate relationships. Amid the tension, attempts at reconciliation were fraught with challenges. Advisors recommended structured discussions, mediated conversations, and temporary separations to diffuse the intensity, but the couple's emotional states often undermined these interventions. Moments of tentative understanding were quickly overshadowed by renewed arguments, resurfacing past grievances, and the lingering shadow of distrust. The chapter captures the cyclical nature of conflict under extreme scrutiny, where efforts at resolution are continually challenged by unresolved hurt and external pressures. The chapter also explores the broader consequences of the leak for their household and immediate family circle. Relationships with staff, family members, and close friends were tested as loyalty, discretion, and confidentiality became increasingly critical. Trust, once a given, became a fragile commodity, with small missteps potentially triggering larger conflicts. The leak not only affected Harry and Meghan's personal dynamics, but also strained their wider support network, illustrating how scandal can reverberate through every level of a private ecosystem. As the evening approached, both Harry and Meghan were left to reflect on the long-term implications of the conflict. The leak had irreversibly altered their public narrative, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about privacy, trust, and the consequences of past actions. Both understood that the coming days would require strategic decisions, emotional resilience, and careful navigation of both personal and public arenas. The chapter closes with a sense of anticipation and tension, setting the stage for the cascading events that would follow as the couple sought to manage the fallout of the scandal. With the aftermath of the explosive confrontation between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, as the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled into a full-blown crisis. The leak by Cory Vitiello regarding Meghan's alleged meetings with Rory McIlroy sent shockwaves not only through their personal lives, but across the global media landscape. News outlets, social media platforms, and gossip channels amplified every detail, transforming a private disagreement into a worldwide spectacle. Harry and Meghan were now navigating a minefield of public scrutiny, emotional turbulence, and strategic decision-making, all while attempting to preserve some semblance of stability in their personal lives. The chapter begins with Harry isolating himself in a private study within their residence, trying to process the layers of betrayal and disbelief he was feeling. Every news alert, every forwarded message, and every social media post acted as a catalyst, stirring a mixture of anger, hurt, and frustration. He meticulously reviewed timelines, cross-referenced hotel bookings, and examined photographs that had surfaced in the media, trying to make sense of the information. Each piece of evidence seemed to contradict his understanding of trust within their marriage, forcing him to confront uncomfortable questions about loyalty, honesty, and the nature of their relationship. Harry's internal monologue reveals the intense emotional toll of feeling blindsided by someone he had deeply trusted and the difficulty of separating personal pain from public exposure. Meanwhile, Meghan navigated a very different emotional landscape. While she maintained her poise and controlled public image, the private reality was fraught with tension and emotional strain. She spent hours with her advisors, discussing narrative management, damage control, and how best to respond to an ever-escalating media frenzy. Her frustration was compounded by the knowledge that, despite her efforts, every word and gesture could be misinterpreted, criticized, or weaponized against her. Meghan oscillated between defensive indignation and strategic calm, understanding that any rash emotional reaction could exacerbate the scandal further. This internal balancing act created a complex interplay of emotions, highlighting the psychological toll of being under relentless public scrutiny while simultaneously dealing with personal betrayal. The chapter then shifts to a detailed recounting of the second confrontation, which took place later in the evening. Harry and Meghan, both emotionally drained but unwilling to let the issue remain unresolved, engaged in a tense discussion that highlighted the depth of their emotional and relational rifts. Harry's voice was firm, tinged with anguish and incredulity, as he presented evidence and expressed the profound disappointment he felt. Meghan, equally resolute, responded with a mixture of denial, justification, and appeals to context, arguing that the situation had been misunderstood or misrepresented. The conversation was punctuated by long pauses, charged glances, and moments of raw vulnerability, capturing the human complexity of two people grappling with both private betrayal and public scrutiny. The narrative explores how external pressures amplified the intensity of their private conflict. The couple was acutely aware that the leak had ignited a storm of public opinion, creating an environment where every emotional response carried enormous consequences. Social media reactions, media headlines, and public speculation became invisible participants in the argument, influencing both Harry's and Meghan's perceptions and heightening the stakes of each interaction. The chapter emphasizes how modern scandals, especially those involving high-profile figures, transform private disputes into performative events, with the audience of the world scrutinizing every emotional cue. Amid this turmoil, the chapter delves into the psychological mechanisms each employed to cope. Harry exhibited heightened vigilance, meticulously analyzing Meghan's words, gestures, and intentions. He questioned motives, revisited prior incidents, and considered potential ulterior agendas, creating a mental environment dominated by suspicion and hyper-awareness. Meghan, conversely, employed cognitive reframing, attempting to maintain composure, assert control over the narrative, and navigate the emotional landscape strategically. These differing coping mechanisms created both conflict and tension, illustrating how individuals respond divergently to crises under intense emotional and public pressure. Chapter 11 also examines the impact of the scandal on their immediate household and support network. Staff members, advisors, and family were drawn into the orbit of the conflict, each attempting to mediate, advise, or distance themselves as circumstances required. Trust became increasingly fragile, with loyalty and discretion emerging as critical currencies. Every action was calculated, every conversation weighed for potential consequences, highlighting the ripple effects of scandal on personal relationships beyond the central figures. The leak created a domino effect, challenging not only the marital bond but also the broader support ecosystem that had previously provided stability. As the night wore on, both Harry and Meghan faced moments of introspection. Harry questioned the sustainability of their relationship under the glare of public scrutiny and the shadow of unverified allegations, contemplating both the personal and strategic implications. Meghan grappled with the balance between defending her reputation, managing the narrative, and preserving the integrity of their marriage. These reflective moments provided a temporary emotional reprieve, allowing both individuals to step back from the immediate conflict and consider the broader trajectory of their personal and public lives. The chapter captures this oscillation between confrontation and reflection, illustrating the nuanced emotional rhythms of high-stakes personal crises. The chapter concludes by setting the stage for the next phase of escalation. The fallout from the leak had introduced new variables, including media narratives, public opinion, and potential interventions from advisors and family. Harry and Meghan were left to navigate these complex dynamics while managing their emotional responses, relationship tensions, and public visibility. Chapter 11 underscores the multifaceted nature of scandal, combining emotional depth, psychological insight, and public consequences, positioning the narrative for further developments in the unfolding story. With the aftermath of the confrontation beginning to ripple beyond the walls of Harry and Meghan's residence. While Chapter 11 focused on the private, emotional clash and the immediate fallout, this chapter delves into the broader consequences, the mounting media frenzy, the reactions of friends, advisors, and the royal household, and the subtle but powerful ways in which personal betrayal and public scrutiny intersect. Harry and Meghan, despite being seasoned in managing public appearances, were confronted with a new, more dangerous dynamic. The leak of intimate details by someone they had previously trusted, Cory Vitiello. The revelation that Meghan allegedly continued meeting Rory McIlroy while married to Prince Harry ignited a storm of speculation, raising questions of loyalty, discretion, and integrity that had tangible implications for both their personal and public lives. The chapter opens with an early morning scene, capturing Harry in quiet reflection. He had spent the night pacing and reviewing every message, every forwarded document, every social media post, trying to reconcile the leak with his understanding of Meghan's character. The anger was still raw, tempered by disbelief and an almost clinical attempt to piece together the factual sequence of events. Harry's thoughts were punctuated by flashes of memory, moments of shared intimacy, private jokes, and the trust he believed had underpinned their marriage. Each recollection now seemed tinged with suspicion, creating a painful tension between affection and betrayal. The narrative explores his cognitive dissonance, the emotional strain of reconciling love with doubt, and the immense psychological burden of living under public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Meghan prepared for the inevitable barrage of media attention. Her day began with briefings from her communications team, advisors outlining talking points, and a careful review of potential narratives that could be spun from the leak. Meghan's approach combined strategic defense with emotional self-preservation. She knew any misstep could not only damage her personal reputation, but also magnify Harry's own vulnerability. The chapter portrays her in moments of internal negotiation, balancing the instinct to respond personally with the necessity of maintaining control over messaging. These dual pressures highlight the unique challenges faced by public figures navigating private betrayal under intense media glare and the complex interplay between image management and personal integrity. The chapter then shifts to the reactions of those surrounding the couple. Close friends and family became involuntary participants in the unfolding drama, offering counsel, support, or warnings. Some expressed concern over Harry's emotional well-being, cautioning him to tread carefully in responding to Meghan's alleged actions. Others offered guidance to Meghan on narrative control, emphasizing the need for restraint and measured responses. This web of influence illustrates the broader ecosystem surrounding Harry and Meghan, showing how trust, loyalty, and advisory roles intersect during times of crisis. The narrative also touches on the tension between personal loyalty and professional obligation, with advisors and confidants navigating the fine line between advocacy and risk mitigation. As the day progressed, the media frenzy intensified. Tabloids, online news outlets, and social media platforms amplified the allegations, turning what might have been a private conflict into a public spectacle. Headlines, screenshots, and commentary flooded every digital space, forcing Harry and Meghan to contend with the relentless scrutiny of global audiences. Chapter 12 captures the psychological impact of this exposure, describing the sense of being under constant observation, the pressure to respond appropriately, and the strain of knowing that private actions could be publicly dissected and judged. This section emphasizes the modern reality of high-profile relationships, that intimacy and trust are constantly threatened by external actors capable of shaping perception and opinion. The chapter examines specific interactions between Harry and Meghan in the wake of public scrutiny. Their conversations, now framed by the external gaze, reflected a heightened intensity. Words carried weight not only for their private meaning, but also for potential public interpretation. Harry's insistence on transparency clashed with Meghan's careful management of narrative, creating friction between the desire for honesty and the need for strategic discretion. These interactions are portrayed in vivid detail, capturing the emotional complexity, the tension between personal feelings and public responsibilities, and the difficulty of negotiating private conflicts under a spotlight. The narrative emphasizes the emotional labor required in these exchanges, highlighting the cognitive and psychological strain imposed by constant visibility. Chapter 12 also explores the role of social media as both a catalyst and amplifier of tension. Platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube became arenas for speculation, judgment, and rumor dissemination. Every leaked photograph, message snippet, or third-party claim added layers of complication, forcing Harry and Meghan to consider both factual responses and the management of perception. The narrative details the strategic calculations involved, when to speak, what to say, and how to safeguard both personal and public interests. The chapter highlights how digital media magnifies emotional stakes, creating a pressure cooker environment in which minor details can escalate into major crises. This examination also touches on the psychological impact of being constantly monitored and critiqued, illustrating the interplay between private emotion and public spectacle. Later in the chapter, attention shifts to the broader implications for the royal family and institutional dynamics. While Harry and Meghan had increasingly distanced themselves from certain traditional roles, the leak posed questions about responsibility, reputation, and alignment with royal expectations. Advisors within the palace monitored the situation, assessing the potential reputational impact and offering guidance on diplomatic and procedural responses. This section underscores the tension between personal agency and institutional oversight, illustrating how high-profile individuals navigate overlapping spheres of authority, expectation, and loyalty. The narrative highlights the challenges of balancing personal integrity with adherence to broader organizational norms, particularly when scandal threatens multiple layers of visibility and consequence. The chapter concludes with a reflective and tense moment, capturing both Harry and Meghan individually as they process the events of the day. Harry wrestles with the complexity of trust, loyalty, and emotional security, contemplating the future of their marriage in light of both the leak and the ongoing public scrutiny. Meghan considers her position, balancing the need to defend her reputation with the desire to preserve her relationship and personal autonomy. The chapter closes on a note of unresolved tension, emphasizing the interplay between private conflict and public exposure, and setting the stage for the subsequent escalation in both personal and media arenas. With the tension from the previous chapter escalating into tangible confrontation, this time extending beyond private spaces and into the public eye. While Chapter 12 examined the emotional aftermath of the leak and the media frenzy, Chapter 13 delves into the fallout, as personal conflict begins to spill over into social, professional, and even legal arenas. The focus shifts to the moments when trust fractures, reputations hang in the balance, and every action is scrutinized, magnified, and interpreted through multiple lenses. Harry, Meghan, and those in their inner circles are forced to navigate a complex maze of strategy, emotion, and consequence, each decision carrying weight that extends far beyond the confines of their immediate relationship. The chapter begins by depicting Harry waking to the realization that the leak has begun affecting his professional engagements and public commitments. Invitations to events that once held personal significance now came with implicit scrutiny, questions, and assumptions. Harry's team immediately began assessing which appearances could be postponed, canceled, or restructured to minimize exposure to media interrogation while still maintaining a semblance of normalcy. The narrative details the strategic considerations involved, illustrating how a single leak can ripple outward, affecting every layer of public life. The tension between personal outrage and professional obligation creates an intricate backdrop, emphasizing the unique pressures faced by individuals living both in the spotlight and in highly scrutinized institutional frameworks. Meanwhile, Meghan was confronted by her own circle, including advisors, friends, and media consultants, all urging careful consideration of every move. Her team analyzed public perception, potential media narratives, and the long-term implications of the leak. They examined how previous public statements, social media posts, and interviews might be reframed in light of the new information. Meghan's internal struggle emerges vividly, torn between defending her personal integrity, protecting her marriage, and maintaining public image. The narrative captures the psychological strain of balancing these sometimes conflicting imperatives, providing insight into the cognitive and emotional labor required to operate effectively in a hypervisible environment. As the day unfolded, interactions between Harry and Meghan became increasingly fraught. Private conversations, once spaces for negotiation and mutual understanding, were now colored by suspicion and heightened emotional intensity. Words that might have been innocuous in the past were now interpreted through the lens of betrayal. The narrative highlights the nuanced interplay between intention and perception, emphasizing how trust, once broken, reshapes communication, amplifies conflict, and complicates even the simplest interactions. This section uses vivid, descriptive storytelling to illustrate the emotional texture of these moments, capturing gestures, tone, and unspoken tensions in a way that immerses the audience in the unfolding drama. The chapter also examines the role of social media and digital amplification. Cory Vitiello's leak, combined with a highly connected digital ecosystem, created a storm in which public opinion and rumor quickly converged. Every comment, share, and post acted as a multiplier, intensifying scrutiny and shaping narratives in real time. The narrative explores how Harry and Meghan attempted to manage these dynamics, balancing strategic silence with carefully measured responses. The chapter details the psychological impact of being constantly observed, evaluated, and commented upon, highlighting the interplay between digital exposure, emotional resilience, and reputational management. Adding complexity to the chapter is the reaction of close confidants and family members. Advisors within the royal circle, friends, and associates all weighed in, offering advice, support, or caution. Their perspectives reveal the diverse pressures surrounding Harry and Meghan, concerns for personal well-being, reputational preservation, and the potential long-term consequences of public perception. The narrative emphasizes the delicate balancing act required when personal loyalty intersects with professional duty, illustrating how every recommendation, comment, and action carries potential ramifications for both individual and institutional reputations. The chapter progresses to describe the ripple effects on professional engagements, philanthropic endeavors, and public appearances. Planned initiatives now faced heightened scrutiny, with media narratives potentially reframing actions in ways that could exacerbate tension or generate controversy. Harry and Meghan's teams had to anticipate these outcomes, proactively mitigating risk while maintaining forward momentum. The narrative details these strategic considerations, showing the constant tension between action and consequence, autonomy and accountability, emotion and calculation. This exploration adds depth to the story by illustrating the multidimensional pressures faced by high-profile individuals in crisis situations. As tensions mounted, the narrative highlights moments of introspection for both Harry and Meghan. Harry reflects on the nature of trust, loyalty, and public expectation, grappling with the gap between private reality and public perception. Meghan contemplates her position, balancing personal agency with relational responsibility, all under the unrelenting scrutiny of a global audience. These introspective sequences provide emotional depth, enabling the audience to understand the internal stakes alongside the external drama. The narrative weaves together personal reflection, public pressure, and strategic calculation to create a rich, multi-layered portrayal of crisis management under extraordinary circumstances. The chapter concludes with the sense that the conflict is far from resolved. While Harry and Meghan attempt to navigate their next steps, the leak and its consequences have permanently altered the landscape of trust, perception, and relational dynamics. The narrative sets the stage for escalating conflict, suggesting that subsequent chapters will explore both the personal and public ramifications of the scandal, including legal considerations, media escalation, and further interpersonal confrontations. The chapter ends on a note of unresolved tension, leaving the audience anticipating the next development while reinforcing the emotional and narrative stakes established throughout the story. With the immediate fallout from the mounting tension between Harry and Meghan, focusing on the erosion of trust and the ways in which public exposure begins to affect their private lives. The chapter emphasizes the emotional intensity of the moment, painting a detailed picture of the strain on their relationship as external pressures and internal doubts collide. Harry, feeling betrayed and blindsided, confronts Meghan in a private setting, but the intensity of the situation makes every word and gesture loaded with significance. The narrative illustrates how the leak by Cory Vitiello, revealing alleged continued encounters between Meghan and Rory McIlroy, has transformed not only public perception but also the very fabric of their domestic interactions. The chapter opens with a vivid depiction of Harry grappling with anger and disbelief. The text explores his emotional state in depth, detailing the physical sensations of tension, the tightness in his chest, the quickened heartbeat, and the restless pacing as he attempts to process the implications of the leak. The narrative examines the complexity of his emotions, intertwining feelings of hurt, frustration, and confusion, alongside a deep concern for how this could affect his public image and personal reputation. The story provides insight into the cognitive dissonance Harry experiences, where the private knowledge of the situation collides with the expectations and scrutiny imposed by the world around him. Simultaneously, Meghan is depicted in a state of heightened alertness, aware that every decision, every explanation, and every interaction could be judged, misinterpreted, or weaponized in the media. The narrative captures her perspective, emphasizing her attempts to rationalize the situation, navigate defensive strategies, and maintain composure under the relentless gaze of public scrutiny. Her internal dialogue is layered with nuance, considerations of personal freedom, the boundaries of marital trust, and the anticipation of reputational consequences. Through detailed storytelling, the chapter humanizes her experience, portraying the stress and isolation that can accompany such high-stakes scrutiny, while also highlighting the strategic thinking required to manage public narratives. The story then transitions into the first confrontation between Harry and Meghan following the leak. The narrative provides a step-by-step breakdown of their dialogue, capturing the tension, pauses, and subtle dynamics of their exchange. The narrative focuses on the interplay between accusation and defense, exploring how emotions can escalate rapidly when trust is questioned and reputations are at stake. Questions arise. Can words bridge the gap created by suspicion? Can intentions be clarified when perceptions are already skewed? These narrative questions pull the audience into the emotional complexity of the scene, prompting reflection on the fragility of trust and the challenges of intimate communication under pressure. Next, the chapter explores the ripple effects on their social and professional circles. Advisors, friends, and associates are drawn into the drama, each offering their own interpretations and advice. The narrative details the nuanced and sometimes conflicting counsel offered to both Harry and Meghan, showing how external voices can amplify tension, create additional pressure, or, conversely, provide pathways for resolution. The text explores these dynamics in depth, emphasizing the psychological complexity of navigating interpersonal relationships when under intense public and media scrutiny. The story examines how advice, intended or otherwise, can become another layer of conflict, complicating decision-making and heightening emotional stakes. An important portion of Chapter 14 addresses the media's role in escalating the conflict. Cory Vitiello's leak becomes a catalyst for an avalanche of speculation, commentary, and narrative framing that spreads across traditional outlets, social media platforms, and digital forums. The chapter illustrates how information, once public, takes on a life of its own, shaping perceptions, influencing opinions, and creating pressure points for both Harry and Meghan. The narrative dives into the mechanisms of media amplification, detailing how headlines, viral posts, and speculative commentary can exacerbate personal tensions, turning private struggles into public spectacle. The chapter highlights the interplay between private reality and public interpretation, demonstrating how high-profile figures are compelled to respond not only to the situation itself, but also to its representation in the media. Further, the chapter explores the psychological toll of being constantly scrutinized. Both Harry and Meghan are shown struggling with sleepless nights, heightened anxiety, and persistent self-doubt. The narrative details their coping strategies, ranging from introspective reflection to consultation with close advisors and mental health professionals. By depicting these strategies in depth, the chapter emphasizes the human cost of living under constant observation and the ways in which stress, fear, and anticipation of judgment can influence behavior. This focus on emotional and psychological dynamics adds a rich layer of depth, providing the audience with a more intimate understanding of the characters' inner worlds. The chapter also delves into the role of relational history in shaping the confrontation. Past experiences, long-standing patterns of communication, and unresolved tensions all surface, influencing the way each party perceives and reacts to the leak. The narrative emphasizes how cumulative experiences and prior breaches of trust intensify emotional reactions, shaping responses that are both rational and instinctively defensive. Through this lens, the chapter explores the complexities of human relationships under duress, illustrating how prior dynamics intersect with current crises to create highly charged interactions that are difficult to navigate. Chapter 14 builds toward a climax in which the emotional and strategic stakes converge. Harry and Meghan must make critical decisions about communication, public positioning, and personal boundaries. The narrative maintains a gripping pace, balancing reflective moments with high-tension interactions, drawing the audience deeper into the unfolding drama. The chapter concludes with a sense of unresolved tension, leaving open questions about reconciliation, strategic response, and the long-term impact of the leak on both their private and public lives. The chapter's ending serves as a narrative bridge, setting the stage for the next stage of escalation in Chapter 15, where the consequences of actions taken under pressure will begin to manifest more publicly and dramatically. With the mounting public fallout from the leaked information and intensifying private tension between Harry and Meghan, the chapter dives immediately into the repercussions, both personal and public, that follow Cory Vitiello's revelation about Meghan allegedly continuing to meet Rory McIlroy while married to Harry. The narrative sets the stage by examining the sudden shift in the royal household's atmosphere and the ripple effect of media scrutiny that begins to penetrate every corner of their lives. The chapter begins by illustrating Harry's psychological state as he processes the leak. The text explores the layers of betrayal, confusion, and anger, providing vivid descriptions of the physical and emotional responses that accompany such intense stress. Harry is depicted pacing through his residence late at night, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. His mind races through scenarios, questioning past decisions and interpreting each detail of the situation. The narrative emphasizes how high-profile life magnifies ordinary emotional struggles, showing Harry grappling not only with personal pain, but also with the implications of how the world will perceive his reaction. Simultaneously, Meghan's perspective is explored in intricate detail. The story portrays her attempts to navigate the growing storm of media scrutiny while protecting her own reputation. She is portrayed analyzing the potential narratives that could emerge, considering both defense strategies and ways to manage public perception. Her internal monologue is layered with tactical thinking, mixed with emotional strain, revealing a person under pressure but determined to maintain control over her personal story. The chapter highlights her awareness of her audience, the global media and the public, and her calculations about timing, disclosure, and messaging. Every decision is shown as a balancing act between private emotions and public optics. The narrative then moves into the initial confrontation following the leak, which is characterized by raw emotion and escalating tension. The dialogue between Harry and Meghan is depicted in rich detail, capturing pauses, body language, and subtle cues that signal shifting power dynamics. The story examines how anger, fear, and mistrust can influence interpretation, often exacerbating conflicts. Each line of dialogue is charged with multiple layers of meaning, and the narrative provides insight into how past experiences, existing insecurities, and high-pressure circumstances amplify reactions. The audience is invited to reflect on the complexity of human relationships under stress and the challenges of reconciling personal loyalty with public accountability. Next, the chapter explores the social and advisory circles surrounding the couple. Close friends, royal aides, and legal advisors weigh in, offering conflicting guidance that heightens tension. The story examines the nuanced ways in which external counsel can both mitigate and amplify conflict, showing how well-intentioned advice may complicate already fragile dynamics. The narrative details the conversations, the differing opinions, and the psychological burden of managing not just one's own emotions, but also the expectations and reactions of a surrounding network that is acutely aware of public visibility. The chapter emphasizes how decisions are rarely made in isolation, particularly when every choice carries social, emotional, and reputational consequences. The media's response is a central focus of the chapter, demonstrating the rapid spread and sensationalization of the leaked information. Headlines, social media commentary, and televised speculation intensify the pressure on Harry and Meghan. The narrative delves into the mechanics of modern media amplification, illustrating how stories evolve as they are shared, commented on, and interpreted by diverse audiences. The text explores the psychological impact of seeing private matters debated publicly, the stress of potential misrepresentation, and the strategic considerations that the couple must weigh in responding to narratives that they did not initiate. The chapter portrays the tension between private reality and public interpretation as a constant, inescapable force shaping both perception and behavior. Chapter 15 also examines the personal relationships within the couple's inner circle. The narrative portrays tension among friends and allies who are drawn into the conflict, each bringing their perspectives and judgments. The story explores the subtle power dynamics, the alliances, and the strains that emerge when confidants must navigate loyalty, honesty, and discretion under intense scrutiny. The chapter emphasizes how private relationships can be tested when external crises intersect with personal loyalties, highlighting the human cost of living a life constantly observed and analyzed. The chapter intensifies as the consequences of the leak begin to manifest in public engagements and official responsibilities. Harry and Meghan are shown grappling with the challenge of fulfilling obligations while managing personal conflict, illustrating the strain of performing under pressure while carrying unresolved emotional burdens. The narrative provides detailed accounts of body language, micro-interactions, and strategic choices made to maintain composure in public appearances, emphasizing the disconnect between the personal turmoil behind the scenes and the polished image presented to the world. The text highlights the psychological toll of maintaining a public persona amid private distress, adding layers of empathy and complexity to the story. The chapter builds toward a critical turning point, where both Harry and Meghan must decide how to move forward amidst escalating tension. Strategic and emotional choices intersect as they consider responses to media narratives, counsel from advisors, and their own values and priorities. The narrative presents this decision-making process in vivid detail, showing how each option carries risk, potential backlash, and emotional weight. The story emphasizes the uncertainty, the high stakes, and the difficulty of navigating intimate relationships in the glare of global attention. The chapter closes with unresolved tension, leaving readers questioning whether reconciliation or escalation will dominate the next phase of their conflict. Chapter 15, through detailed exploration of emotional turbulence, media scrutiny, interpersonal dynamics, and strategic decision-making, provides a fully realized depiction of the intensifying crisis between Harry and Meghan. By combining vivid storytelling, psychological insight, and nuanced narrative arcs, the chapter immerses the audience in the complexities of high-profile relationships under pressure. The tension set in this chapter sets the stage for the next sequence, where the public fallout and private strategies will collide in even more dramatic and unforeseen ways. With the aftermath of the confrontation reaching a tipping point, the narrative opens by depicting the immediate emotional fallout inside the residence. Harry, still reeling from betrayal and shock, retreats into a quiet corner of the house, grappling with a mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Every movement he makes is charged with tension. Even mundane actions like walking down a hallway or handling documents are shadowed by the weight of recent revelations. The text emphasizes the physical manifestations of emotional distress, tightened jaw muscles, restless pacing, shallow breaths, as a way to immerse the audience in Harry's lived experience. Meanwhile, Meghan's perspective is explored with equal depth. She is portrayed as balancing a calculated defense with moments of vulnerability, attempting to rationalize her decisions and anticipate their consequences. Her internal dialogue reveals a complex blend of self-preservation, frustration, and resentment at feeling cornered by circumstances she did not anticipate spiraling so publicly. The narrative highlights her awareness of both Harry's emotional state and the potential media explosion, showing how these twin pressures shape her behavior, choices, and interactions. Each thought and action is illustrated with subtle, descriptive cues, from the flicker of her eyes to the tension in her fingers, reinforcing the psychological realism of the scene. The chapter transitions to the strategic discussions that occur among close advisors and confidants. Conversations between lawyers, media consultants, and trusted friends illustrate the complex balancing act of protecting public image while managing private conflicts. Detailed dialogue depicts disagreements over potential responses to the leak, ranging from legal action to carefully crafted public statements. These discussions underscore the multiplicity of pressures faced by high-profile individuals and the ways in which even well-meaning advice can unintentionally escalate tension. The audience is invited to understand the stakes and the layered complexity of decision-making in such an extraordinary context. Parallel to these private struggles, the story examines the broader social and public repercussions. Headlines emerge almost immediately, amplifying speculation and judgment across global media platforms. The narrative dives into the rapid evolution of the story on social media, showing how fan reactions, commentary threads, and trending topics create a feedback loop that magnifies stress and intensifies scrutiny. Public reaction becomes a character in itself, exerting pressure on both Harry and Meghan, influencing decisions and shaping perceptions. The chapter captures the sense of being constantly observed, where every action, expression, and word is dissected by millions. Chapter 16 delves deeper into the interpersonal strain between Harry and Meghan. The narrative explores subtle moments of tension during shared activities, mealtimes, brief meetings, and routine discussions, where unspoken accusations and lingering resentment permeate the atmosphere. The text emphasizes the difficulty of maintaining civility under emotional duress, showing how minor interactions become fraught with meaning, suspicion, and potential for escalation. The story details facial expressions, microreactions, and body language, reinforcing the psychological realism and heightening the reader's sense of intimacy with the unfolding drama. The chapter also examines the impact on extended family and close allies. Members of the royal household, friends, and distant relatives are depicted as reacting in real time to rumors, partial information, and leaks. The narrative explores the tension between loyalty, curiosity, and self-interest, showing how information travels through informal networks and how misunderstandings or misinterpretations can exacerbate conflicts. By portraying the ripple effects across the network of relationships, the story underscores how a single revelation can destabilize an entire social ecosystem, particularly when the individuals involved are both highly visible and highly scrutinized. As the chapter progresses, the story introduces moments of reflection and introspection for both Harry and Meghan. Harry is shown questioning his trust in those closest to him, grappling with feelings of vulnerability and betrayal, and wrestling with the implications for his marriage. Meghan's inner dialogue examines her strategies for damage control, the moral and ethical considerations of her choices, and the balancing act of asserting independence while mitigating public judgment. These reflective passages provide depth and nuance, allowing the audience to empathize with the emotional complexity of both parties, even amid conflicting perspectives. Chapter 16 escalates as tension begins to influence public appearances, official duties, and social interactions. Harry and Meghan must navigate formal engagements while managing private turmoil, forcing them to present a composed, unified front in public despite their internal discord. The narrative explores the physical and psychological toll of this dual performance, highlighting the contrast between outward poise and inner chaos. Moments of hesitation, forced smiles, and subtle gestures are detailed to illustrate the immense pressure of sustaining appearances under scrutiny. The chapter culminates with a turning point. the recognition that private conflict can no longer remain isolated. Both Harry and Meghan must confront the reality that their personal struggle has public consequences, and the decisions they make in this moment will shape not only their relationship, but also their public image and influence on the monarchy. The narrative builds tension by emphasizing the weight of choice, the uncertainty of outcomes, and the emotional stakes involved. The chapter closes with the pair standing at the threshold of critical decisions, their next moves poised to redefine the trajectory of both their private and public lives. Chapter 16, through vivid exploration of emotional turbulence, strategic planning, public scrutiny, and interpersonal dynamics, deepens the story of Harry and Meghan's crisis. By combining psychological insight, narrative tension, and detailed contextualization, the chapter immerses the audience in the high-stakes reality of navigating personal conflict under global observation, setting the stage for the next chapter where these tensions escalate into even more dramatic developments. In the quiet hours of the evening, yet the tension inside the residence is anything but calm. The previous day's confrontation has left lingering wounds, and Harry finds himself trapped in a swirl of thoughts that refuse to settle. Every detail of the leak, Cory Vitiello's exposure of hotel meetings, the alleged closeness with Rory McIlroy, and the implications of secrecy, circulates relentlessly in his mind. The narrative paints an intimate portrait of his emotional state, describing the restless pacing through dimly lit hallways, the frequent clenching of fists, and the involuntary tightening of his jaw muscles. These subtle but telling physical manifestations convey the weight of betrayal and shock, drawing the audience directly into Harry's lived experience. Meanwhile, Meghan's world is equally fraught with tension, though her approach is markedly different. The chapter delves into her strategic thinking, detailing how she balances panic with calculation. Her internal monologue reveals a web of justifications, the rationalizations she clings to in order to maintain a sense of control. She meticulously plans her next communications, anticipates potential leaks, and weighs the consequences of any public statement. The narrative captures micro-moments of vulnerability, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a brief hesitation in her gestures, creating a nuanced portrait of a figure navigating intense pressure. The contrast between Harry's emotional upheaval and Meghan's calculated response adds a dynamic tension to the story, allowing the audience to perceive the different ways each processes betrayal. The chapter shifts to the ripple effects beyond the private residence, exploring the storm brewing in the public sphere. The leak spreads rapidly, with social media platforms igniting in speculation, memes, and heated commentary. Fans and critics alike engage in debates that amplify the story's emotional intensity. The narrative examines the mechanics of virality, how a single revelation can trigger cascades of opinion, and how the digital environment acts as both magnifier and tormentor. In this section, the story emphasizes that the couple's personal conflict has transcended private boundaries, making their relationship a global spectacle subject to relentless judgment. Tension escalates as advisors and confidants weigh in. Lawyers, PR strategists, and close friends convene, debating courses of action that could protect the couple's image while mitigating the fallout. The dialogue illustrates the difficult balancing act. Aggressive public defense risks escalation, silence invites interpretation, and missteps could inflame media scrutiny. Each character's perspective is explored, revealing conflicts between loyalty, professional obligation, and self-preservation. These behind-the-scenes dynamics provide the audience with insight into the machinery that surrounds high-profile individuals, showing how decisions are rarely simple and often fraught with unintended consequences. Interpersonal dynamics between Harry and Meghan intensify. Private interactions become microcosms of the broader conflict, with each gesture, glance, and tone carrying layers of unspoken meaning. The narrative details a dinner scene where tension simmers beneath a veneer of civility, the clinking of cutlery, the careful choice of words, and fleeting expressions of frustration. By focusing on these small but loaded moments, the chapter conveys the complexity of human emotion under stress, allowing viewers to empathize with the psychological strain on both individuals while building anticipation for inevitable escalation. The story then explores how extended family and allies respond. Royal aides, distant relatives and mutual friends are depicted processing partial information, rumors, and leaks, often struggling to navigate their allegiances. The chapter examines how misinformation and incomplete narratives can exacerbate conflict, demonstrating the fragility of trust within tightly knit social networks. By showing the cascading effects of a single revelation, the narrative illustrates the breadth of impact that personal indiscretions can have in high-stakes environments. Amid the tension, moments of reflection punctuate the narrative. Harry grapples with the dissonance between public image and private reality, questioning whom he can trust and wrestling with profound emotional vulnerability. Meghan, in parallel, evaluates her strategy for preserving agency while responding to accusations and media scrutiny. These introspective passages deepen the emotional resonance, providing the audience with a window into the inner lives of both figures and highlighting the psychological complexity that defines their crisis. The chapter also examines the physical and psychological toll of sustained public attention. Harry and Meghan are forced to maintain appearances at official engagements, all while managing intense private strain. The narrative captures the dissonance between composed public behavior and inner turmoil, highlighting the mental gymnastics required to navigate both simultaneously. Gestures, microexpressions, and subtle interactions are meticulously described to convey the invisible burden of living under constant observation. Chapter 17 escalates to a crucial narrative pivot. The couple recognizes that private handling of the situation is no longer viable. Every choice carries significant consequences for both personal relationships and public perception. Tension mounts as they consider their next moves, each option fraught with risk and potential backlash. The narrative builds suspense by emphasizing the uncertainty and gravity of their decisions, creating a sense of imminent climax while leaving the audience eager for resolution in the subsequent chapters. Through detailed exploration of emotional intensity, strategic calculation, interpersonal strain, and public scrutiny, Chapter 17 immerses viewers in the high-stakes reality of a relationship under siege. The chapter bridges private and public spheres, illustrating the intertwining pressures that shape behavior and decision-making. By the end, the story positions Harry and Meghan on the precipice of transformative choices, setting the stage for dramatic developments in the chapters that follow. In the aftermath of the explosive leak, capturing the first tremors of a confrontation that had been simmering beneath the surface, Harry, still reeling from the revelations, feels an almost tangible weight pressing on his chest. The narrative opens with him alone in his private study, walls lined with books and family photos, a space that once provided solace now feeling suffocating. He traces his fingers over the edge of a photograph of him and Meghan on happier days, memories of laughter and shared dreams clashing violently with the reality of betrayal now laid bare. The description emphasizes subtle physical reactions. Shallow breathing, a tightened grip on the armrest of his chair, restless foot tapping, all conveying internal turbulence without a single word needing to be spoken. Meanwhile, Meghan is depicted preparing for a public engagement, her mind running on a dual track of composed professionalism and private strategizing. The story delves into her meticulous attention to detail, her wardrobe, her public talking points, and her anticipated responses to potential questions, all while managing the emotional fallout of the leak. Through her inner monologue, the audience gains insight into the conflict between her need for control and the gnawing anxiety that accompanies exposure of personal actions. The narrative paints a portrait of a figure balancing the external demands of public life with the internal pressures of secrecy and moral justification. The chapter then introduces the central confrontation. In a dimly lit hallway, Harry and Meghan cross paths, the tension in the air palpable. The story uses descriptive imagery to capture the charged atmosphere. The faint hum of distant conversation, the echo of footsteps, the fleeting shadow cast by a chandelier. Their conversation begins cautiously, each testing the other with measured words that carry hidden accusations. Harry's voice carries a tremor of restrained anger, while Meghan's tone blends calm with defensive undercurrents. The narrative emphasizes the weight behind their statements, illustrating how even the simplest phrases are loaded with unspoken emotion and historical context. Conflict escalates rapidly. Harry's frustration boils over as he references the details of the leak, Cory Vitiello's proof, and the alleged interactions with Rory McIlroy. Meghan responds with a blend of denial, justification, and counteraccusation, leading to an emotionally charged exchange where both parties are forced to confront the stark differences in perception and expectation. The story breaks down their dialogue into beats that reveal psychological complexity, pauses that signify hesitation, raised eyebrows conveying incredulity, and subtle shifts in body language that underscore the tension. Each interaction is painted with vivid detail, allowing the audience to feel the mounting strain as the confrontation intensifies. Outside the immediate confrontation, the narrative broadens to the ripple effects in the royal household and social circles. Advisors, family members, and close confidants are shown reacting to the news, some attempting mediation while others speculate on the long-term implications. The story explores the delicate balance between loyalty and duty, illustrating how personal relationships within the household are tested under the pressure of scandal. This section emphasizes that the fallout extends far beyond the couple, affecting reputations, alliances, and the intricate social fabric surrounding them. The chapter also examines the media storm ignited by the leak. Headlines, social media commentary, and public speculation form a backdrop that amplifies tension. The narrative conveys how the omnipresence of media scrutiny transforms private disputes into public spectacle, forcing both Harry and Meghan to navigate a complex web of narrative control, rumor management, and strategic communication. This lens of external observation heightens the emotional stakes, as every action and reaction is potentially amplified, dissected, and judged on a global scale. Amid the chaos, moments of reflection punctuate the narrative. Harry considers the trajectory of their relationship, questioning whether trust can be rebuilt and whether the foundation of their partnership can withstand such revelations. Meghan, in turn, evaluates her motivations, actions, and potential next steps, weighing the consequences of transparency against the instinct for self-preservation. These introspective passages deepen the audience's understanding of both characters, creating empathy and tension simultaneously. The chapter progresses to a critical decision point. Both Harry and Meghan realize that the confrontation cannot resolve all issues. External communication, private reflection, and strategic choices will all play a role in determining the next phase of their relationship. The narrative builds suspense by illustrating the stakes, the personal cost of continued conflict, the risk of public judgment, and the potential for irreversible damage. Every choice is laden with consequence, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Chapter 18 concludes with a scene that juxtaposes private emotional intensity against the indifferent march of public time. The couple separates for the night, leaving a lingering tension that the reader can almost feel in the air. The story ends this section on a note of anticipation, with the audience left wondering how the next confrontation will unfold and what choices will define the next chapter of their relationship. Through rich descriptive language, nuanced character exploration, and strategic pacing, the chapter maintains engagement while deepening emotional resonance. With the aftermath of the explosive confrontation, focusing on the personal and public reverberations that ripple through Harry and Meghan's lives. The narrative opens with Harry retreating to a secluded part of the royal estate, a private wing rarely used except for moments requiring absolute solitude. The description emphasizes the sensory environment, the soft creak of the wooden floor underfoot, the muted sunlight filtering through heavy drapes, and the faint scent of polished oak mingling with the lingering aroma of tea and papers. Harry's internal state is mirrored by the environment. Quiet yet tense, filled with unspoken anxieties and the weight of betrayal. Every detail, from the chill of the marble hearth to the irregular ticking of a distant clock, accentuates the psychological pressure he is experiencing. Harry's mind races as he replays the confrontation repeatedly, analyzing Meghan's words, inflections, and subtle gestures. The narrative breaks down his thought process meticulously, the questioning of intentions, the struggle between disbelief and acknowledgement, and the constant pull of protective instincts versus the desire for clarity. The audience is drawn into Harry's perspective, allowing them to understand the complexity of his emotional response without resorting to oversimplification. Every memory, past conversation, and intimate moment shared with Meghan becomes a lens through which the current crisis is filtered, highlighting the stark contrast between what he believed their marriage represented and the evidence now presented by Cory Vitiello. Meanwhile, Meghan is shown in a contrasting environment, a luxury hotel suite in London, meticulously arranged, with every element reflecting control and intentionality. The narrative emphasizes her composure, even as internal tension simmers. Through a combination of physical description and inner monologue, the story conveys her dual reality, the necessity of maintaining a public facade while privately strategizing damage control. She reviews correspondence, reassesses past meetings, and calculates potential narratives in advance of media exposure. These insights illustrate her complex psychology, demonstrating both resourcefulness and vulnerability under intense scrutiny. The chapter expands to show the external pressures compounding the personal conflict. Royal aides, security personnel, and private advisors are depicted navigating the tension, each with their own perspective on the situation. Some attempt to mediate, others speculate on long-term ramifications, and still others consider the optics of media leaks in shaping public perception. This interwoven subplot highlights the structural and hierarchical dynamics surrounding Harry and Meghan, emphasizing how private disputes inevitably intersect with institutional responsibilities and public expectations. The narrative provides context on the balance between personal agency and systemic influence, making the audience aware of the multifaceted pressures that shape decisions and reactions. Media reaction is detailed with precision, creating an omnipresent backdrop that amplifies the stakes. Social media posts, breaking news segments, and gossip columns are all interspersed, showing how every rumor and headline shapes perception and adds layers of complexity. The story emphasizes how Cory Vitiello's leak acts as a catalyst for this media storm, triggering speculation about Meghan's interactions with Rory McIlroy while married. The narrative describes the velocity of information spread, the polarization of public opinion, and the intensifying scrutiny of both their personal lives and royal duties. Each development feeds into the tension, heightening the sense of urgency and stakes for both parties. The chapter then delves into the dynamics of trust and betrayal. Harry's perspective is explored in depth, examining how the revelation challenges his understanding of loyalty, honesty, and partnership. The narrative details the cognitive dissonance he experiences, reconciling past affirmations of love and commitment with the tangible evidence now circulating. Similarly, Meghan's viewpoint is explored, highlighting her rationalizations, strategic calculations, and emotional defenses. The story portrays her as a multidimensional figure navigating a labyrinth of personal desire, ambition, and external expectations. The interplay of these perspectives creates a rich psychological tableau, offering the audience an intimate look at both characters' inner worlds. Tension escalates as the narrative moves toward a high-stakes public event. Harry and Meghan are required to appear together at a ceremonial engagement, and the chapter carefully describes their physical and emotional preparation. Attention is given to clothing choices, body language rehearsals, and strategic positioning to convey solidarity while masking inner conflict. The reader witnesses the mental gymnastics required to maintain composure under scrutiny, as well as the subtle signs that hint at unresolved tension, fleeting eye contact, measured smiles, and the occasional moment of stiffness. These details heighten suspense and anticipation for what the public and media will perceive, emphasizing the delicate balance between personal authenticity and public expectation. In the final portion of the chapter, Harry and Meghan confront the reality that the confrontation and subsequent leak are just the beginning of a prolonged and multifaceted struggle. Advisors caution them on potential ramifications for reputation, trust within the royal family, and media portrayal, framing the leak not merely as an isolated incident, but as a precursor to ongoing challenges. The narrative foreshadows future confrontations, legal considerations, and potential shifts in alliances. The chapter closes on a scene of quiet intensity, Harry pacing alone in his private study while Meghan surveys the city from her hotel suite, both absorbed in reflection, both anticipating the next inevitable escalation. This ending establishes suspense and positions the audience for the unfolding drama in the following chapters. With the immediate fallout from Cory Vitiello's leak, focusing on the shockwaves it sends through Harry and Meghan's inner circle. The narrative opens with the quiet of the royal estate shattered by urgent phone calls, whispered conversations, and the low hum of staff moving quickly to contain the situation. Every detail is carefully painted. The rustle of papers as advisors scan messages, the subtle tension in the air as security updates protocols, and the flickering of screens in the private study as news reports begin to surface online. The setting mirrors the chaos of Harry's and Meghan's emotions, orderly on the surface, yet turbulent beneath. The chapter then delves into Harry's perspective, emphasizing the intensity of his emotions as he processes the leak. His thoughts are detailed with painstaking clarity. Anger, disbelief, confusion, and a gnawing sense of betrayal dominate his internal dialogue. He recalls private conversations, intimate moments, and assurances previously shared with Meghan, each memory now shadowed by doubt. The narrative meticulously explores the psychological strain of reconciling love with suspicion, creating an immersive experience for the audience. Every heartbeat, hesitation, and fleeting expression is described to draw viewers into the immediacy of his emotional reality. Simultaneously, Meghan is portrayed in her hotel suite, a juxtaposition of composure and calculation. The narrative emphasizes her meticulous attention to detail, arranging her surroundings to project calm, reviewing media coverage, and strategizing potential responses. Her inner monologue reveals the tension between maintaining appearances and addressing the personal implications of the leak. The story highlights the subtle cues of her emotional state: a tightened jaw, the brief faltering of her usual poise, and the quiet exhalation as she processes the storm brewing around her. These descriptions humanize her experience, showing vulnerability amidst carefully curated control. The chapter expands to include the role of the media and public reaction, creating a layered view of the situation. Social media posts, breaking news segments, and opinion pieces spread like wildfire, amplifying every nuance of the alleged hotel encounters. The narrative describes the mechanics of this amplification: hashtags trending, journalists speculating, and commentators dissecting body language and photographs. Each development adds tension, as the public's gaze becomes an invisible force shaping decisions, actions, and emotions. Cory Vitiello's leak serves as the fulcrum, triggering scrutiny that intersects with both private and public spheres, heightening stakes for the central figures. Advisors and staff are depicted navigating the increasingly volatile environment, balancing damage control with loyalty to their employers. Some attempt to mediate between Harry and Meghan, while others strategize how to manage public perception. The story emphasizes the logistical and emotional complexity of these roles, coordinating appearances, managing leaks, and preparing statements while monitoring interpersonal dynamics. These subplots illustrate the intricate network surrounding the couple, showing how personal conflict inevitably entwines with institutional responsibilities and media scrutiny. Conflict escalates when Harry confronts Meghan directly, seeking clarity and accountability. The narrative details the physical and emotional setting of their encounter. A private room in a quiet wing of a palace, the tension palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. Dialogue is carefully reconstructed to convey intensity, capturing both the raw emotional impact and the subtleties of hesitation, subtext, and power dynamics. The audience is drawn into the immediacy of the confrontation, experiencing the heightened stakes, unresolved tension, and the emotional interplay of anger, hurt, and pleading for honesty. The chapter also examines the psychological impact on both parties. Harry grapples with the erosion of trust and the challenge of navigating emotions under constant public scrutiny. Meghan wrestles with the pressure to maintain control, project confidence, and respond strategically. Their internal struggles are juxtaposed, highlighting the complex interplay of love, loyalty, ambition, and fear. The narrative emphasizes the human dimension behind headlines and speculation, providing a nuanced portrayal of their emotional landscape. In the closing scenes, attention shifts to the broader consequences of the confrontation. Advisors anticipate media fallout, The royal family weighs reputational risks, and both Harry and Meghan face decisions that will affect personal relationships and public perception for months to come. The narrative captures a moment of tense reflection. Harry alone in a study, staring at the evidence and replaying conversations, while Meghan watches the city lights from her suite, formulating her next move. The chapter ends on a note of suspense and anticipation, signaling unresolved tensions and setting the stage for subsequent escalation. Opens with the immediate aftermath of Harry and Meghan's heated confrontation. The tension from the previous chapter carries forward, but now the focus shifts to the subtle ripple effects of that argument on their daily routines and interpersonal dynamics. The narrative begins with Harry retreating to his private quarters, a space that once felt secure, now suffused with unease. Every object in the room, the leather-bound books on the shelf, the framed photographs, the polished wood of his desk, seems to amplify the silence around him, mirroring the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. The chapter emphasizes his mental oscillation between rationality and emotional impulse, creating a vivid picture of a man struggling to process betrayal while maintaining composure under relentless scrutiny. Meanwhile, Meghan's perspective is explored with equal depth. She is depicted moving through a meticulously curated hotel suite, where every element, from the placement of furniture to the subtle lighting, contributes to an illusion of calm control. However, her internal monologue reveals a maelstrom of strategic thinking, defensive maneuvering, and self-justification. She reviews messages, cross-checks timelines, and mentally prepares for the potential public fallout. The narrative portrays her as a figure of composure under pressure, but layered with complexity, showing vulnerability beneath the cultivated exterior. Small, nuanced details, like a lingering pause at the mirror, a tightening of her grip on a glass of water, underscore the human tension behind the calculated appearances. The chapter broadens to include the role of Cory Vitiello, whose leak acts as a catalyst not just for the argument, but for the entire unfolding drama. Through the lens of investigative storytelling, the narrative outlines how Cory's revelation traveled through social networks, media outlets, and private channels, intensifying pressure on both Harry and Meghan. The story dives into the mechanics of the leak, messages sent to journalists, private screenshots circulated among insiders, and the viral amplification across social media platforms. Each step of dissemination adds layers of urgency and suspense, showing how a single act of disclosure can spiral into a multifaceted crisis impacting personal relationships, public perception, and institutional reputation simultaneously. Advisors and aides are portrayed in this chapter as navigating a labyrinth of damage control measures. Scenes alternate between urgent phone calls and hushed tones, rapid-fire email exchanges, and strategic discussions about how to address the media without inflaming tensions further. These glimpses behind the curtain reveal the complex orchestration required to manage the reputational fallout of high-profile figures. The narrative details the intricate choreography of image management, from preparing talking points to coordinating public appearances, demonstrating how every personal action becomes a public spectacle in the context of royalty. As the chapter progresses, the emotional toll on Harry becomes more pronounced. He struggles with the juxtaposition of love and suspicion, recalling intimate moments now tainted by uncertainty. The narrative delves deeply into his thought process, illustrating the difficulty of maintaining trust while confronting evidence that challenges his perception of reality. Emotional beats, such as a clenched fist, a shallow breath, or the silent replaying of conversations in his mind, are described in precise detail to immerse the audience in the psychological intensity of the moment. These depictions highlight not only the personal struggle, but also the broader stakes of navigating a relationship under constant public and media scrutiny. Simultaneously, Meghan's emotional landscape is explored through her attempts to control the narrative and protect her autonomy. She weighs every potential response, from private confrontation to public statement, while grappling with the moral and ethical dimensions of the leak. The narrative explores the tension between self-preservation and accountability, emphasizing her strategic thinking, emotional resilience, and the subtle cracks in her composure. Moments of hesitation, introspection, and internal conflict provide insight into her character, adding depth to the portrayal of a figure operating under immense pressure. The chapter further examines the dynamics between the couple and their broader support network. Close aides, confidants, and family members become actors in a high-stakes psychological drama, their loyalties tested and their decisions consequential. The narrative depicts strategic conversations and subtle interventions, showing how every interaction can influence the trajectory of conflict. The interplay between private loyalty and public expectation adds complexity, highlighting the tension between individual agency and systemic pressures. In the concluding scenes of Chapter 21, attention turns to the looming presence of the media and the inevitability of public scrutiny. News outlets dissect the leak, social media explodes with speculation, and the royal family braces for potential fallout. Harry and Meghan, both isolated yet deeply interconnected through their shared circumstances, are left to navigate the tension, uncertainty, and emotional consequences of the breach in trust. The chapter closes with a sense of anticipation and unresolved tension, foreshadowing the subsequent escalation of conflicts and the pivotal decisions yet.